Hello everyone and welcome to another very exciting game from round 7 of the Tata Steel Chess Tournament 2021 in a game between Pentala Harikrishna and Alireza Firouzja. Harikrishna so far without a loss, he has one win against Nils Grandelius from round 4, whereas Alireza lost his first round game to Magnus Carlsen. If you remember that crazy game we've shown immediately after it finished, but Alireza also has 3 wins, so Alireza is trying to catch up to the leaders of the tournament. So like I said, it's a pretty wild game. Let's see what happens. So Harikrishna with the white pieces opens with d4. We have d5 by Alireza, c4, and now c6 going for the Slav defense. And Harikrishna exchanges once. We have captures, and now bishop to f4. We have knight to c6 by Alireza and now e3, closing up this structure here, now that the dark square bishop has been developed. And here, the top move in the database is knight to f6, but Alireza decides to mix it up with bishop to f5. And here we have bishop to b5, and already as of move 6 we have a completely new game. Someone asked in the comments on the previous video, what does it mean, a completely new game? I often mention this like every 100 videos or so. So there are these storages of chess games called the databases, and then we can check all the games for moves. So whenever I analyze for example, this game, I check if any of the moves were played, who played them, why they were played, how many times a certain move has been played, and then I know whenever we reach a certain position that has never been reached before. I personally consider that to be very interesting, and a lot of you said that you also consider this to be interesting, that we know that we are now covering new grounds. So that's what I mean when I say we have a completely new game. Just putting that out there. So bishop to b5, never played before, a completely new move, and already as of move 6. So here Alireza just continues developing. We have e6, he also closes up this structure, and now knight to c3. We have knight to e7, could be very useful in the future. You can go knight g6, attack the bishop, maybe go h5, h4, and so on. So here rook to c1, and we have a6. Now asking, do you want to trade, or I'm just going to push back your bishop. So bishop back to e2, and now f6. Alireza doesn't mind weakening the e6 pawn a little bit because he wants to start pushing here. So here g4, Harikrishna beats him to it, attacks the bishop to g6, and now knight to f3. So you've also made some room on g3 for your bishop if needed. We have bishop to f7, now adding additional support to the e6 pawn and preparing to push those kingside pawns. Bishop back to g3, and now Alireza goes for h5. So he wants to open up the h file for his rook. Harikrishna doesn't allow it. He pushes g5, and now knight to g6. And already here we have a very interesting moment in the game where it's like we said, it was a new position already as of move 6. So this is a very uncovered ground. And here you should play h4. Just support that pawn on g5, prevent black from playing h4, and your position is good. But here Harikrishna captured on f6, and this is where his troubles begin. Because now, of course, he was hoping for g captures on f6, and then he's going to play h4, and everything is perfectly fine. However, he missed one Zwischenzug that Alireza had in mind. So after g captures on f6, Alireza says, nope, not going to capture that. I'm just going to push h4. And now you're kind of in a bit of trouble because the bishop has to go somewhere, and wherever you play the bishop, the knight will capture it. And with the game being very open, you kind of do want the advantage of the bishop pair. So here f captures on g7 first, bishop captures, and now bishop to e5. You have to give it up, but black will also recapture his lost pawn. So we have knight g captures on e5, d captures, and here Alireza just grabs it. Knight captures on e5, and now knight to d4, avoiding the trade and also hoping to put some pressure on that weak e6 pawn. So rook to c8, Alireza brings the rook into the game, and here white castles. And it's very interesting that white castles here. The whole position is very interesting. Where is white castling, where is black castling? White doesn't have a g pawn, the entire king side is shattered, black has no pawns on the king side. It's not a position you see every day. But here, for example, if rook to g1, you might think, why should I castle? I might use the g file for my rook. But then let's say bishop f6, and you can see that all of these squares are covered by the bishops. This is covered by the knight, this is covered by the pawn. So the rook will not have all that much to do here on the g file. So instead of bringing the rook to g1, Hare Krishna just castled, and now Alireza plays knight to c6. Now he's putting some pressure on the knight here. He has some ideas of pushing the pawns in the center, and also if something like rook to g8, you don't have to worry. The king will be safe on h1. It's not the position is very unlikely to open up that the white king will be in danger. So here, bishop to g4. Again, just putting pressure on that e6 pawn. So Alireza eliminates one of the attackers, knight captures, e captures, and now rook to c6. Just a nice rook lift to add more defense to the pawn here. In the future, you might have some ideas of shifting the rook over to the king side for attacking purposes. So knight to e2. Adding a defender to this d4 pawn, because black always has this option of adding more pressure to the pawn. So this defends it, and also it offers a trade-off of rooks. So here Alireza says let's play h3. And h3 is a very nice idea because it prevents white from playing h3, and it's such a you know, it's always ugly when you have to play and your opponent has his pawn all the way to your king. You constantly have to calculate everything. Like if the bishop moves, maybe like ideas like queen g5 check, king h1, queen to g2 checkmate become possible all of a sudden. So here rook to c3. Saying that, okay, you will either capture here, and then I'm going to recapture with my pawn and have a very strong center, or I'm just going to capture this pawn on h3, which is now obviously a weakness. But Alireza says obviously not, and plays rook to h4. Now saying that if you go after the pawn, the problem is after, for example, bishop captures, rook captures on c3, you eliminate one of the defenders, and then you just pick up the bishop. Or of course, if you capture with the rook, then you lose the bishop. So here, Hare Krishna plays rook to g3, and now queen to c7. Just putting more pressure to that king side. And here, while you can capture on h3, there's no point in doing it right away. For example, captures bishop h5. Now it's very annoying. So it doesn't seem like there's ever a good time to capture this pawn for now. So here, rook to e1 first, and now king to f8, getting the king to safety away from the e file. We have queen to d3, and now comes e5. So now the queen is has left the d1 square. Now you will be able to capture on h3, but Alireza starts pushing in the center, e5. And the e5 is a very sneaky move. You're threatening a lot of stuff here. For example, capturing the d4 pawn, you might have ideas of pushing the pawn to e4, and white needs to take all of this into account. So here, you might consider moving the queen, you might consider bishop captures on h3, you might consider king h1. A lot of moves are possible here. Before doing any of that, Hare Krishna decided to deliver this queen to a3 check, just checking to see if the king will move to the g file in line of the rook, or will maybe Alireza block with the queen. So as black is the one who's attacking here, Pentala really wants to get the queens off the board, and Alireza says nope, not a problem. Goes queen to d6, and we have a queen trade. Captures, and now finally bishop captures on h3, saying that, okay, you're either going to advance the pawn, and then I'm going to be up a pawn, or you capture on d4, and then your pawn structure in the center is all messed up. But Alireza says that's not a problem. Just captures on d4. This pawn is very well protected, and now because you capture the h3 pawn, you're going to have some problems here along the h file when I double up my rooks here. So knight to c1, and now rook d to h6, going after that bishop and the pawn. So you have to move the bishop to g2, and now comes rook captures on h2. We have knight to d3, and now a rook back to h5, just taking away that e5 square from the white knight. So f4 here, with options of maybe getting the knight to e5, or maybe you want to start pushing that pawn if the opportunity will arrive. But here Alireza just goes rook to c6. He says, I want to get my rook all the way to the second rank, and then my position will be just unstoppable. So here, bishop to f3, going after the rook. We could play knight e5, but it doesn't seem to be sufficient. For example, captures, and now blocks with bishop to e6, and black's position will always be better here. For example, if rook d1 going after the pawn, rook to c2. So you can take one of the doubled pawns. It's not really a problem, but black will be very happy with his activity along the second rank. So here after rook to c6, we have bishop to f3 first, challenging the rook here, and now rook h to h6. We have rook back to g2, not allowing rook to c2. This rook lift, and now rook h to g6. Here Alireza offers a trade of one of the rooks, and Hare Krishna says, all right, but we trade on g2. And here, if you capture on g2, for example, captures, and rook c2, yes, you got your rook to the second rank, but after king to g3, there's no good way to take advantage of this. The knight is still on d3, guarding the pawn here, so it's not really that big of a deal. And if you go, for example, rook to d2, you attack the knight, then, for example, knight c5, and now, finally, if you capture it, then you have this knight to e6 check, and it's a very, very tricky position. Rook captures, now this can be captured, this is going to be pushed, and it's an equalish position. So instead, after f5, Alireza doesn't like that. He goes back, rook to h6, and now we have knight to f4. So knight to f4 is looks very scary, but it is in fact the move that allows Alireza a winning advantage. But for Alireza to win this, you have to pause the video and try to find the winning idea for him while I give you a couple of seconds. So, do your thing. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting the unspottable move. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's nothing to do with rook, but it's d3. So congratulations to everyone who found it. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, the reason why d3 is so strong is because it can be captured, and it's hard to find the reasoning behind this move, but when you see it, then you of course believe it. So here, not capturing the pawn doesn't really make sense. It's too strong a pawn to be just left there. Now rook to c2 is again an option because the pawn is just will be defending that, so you have to eliminate this pawn. So this is what Hare Krishna did, but now comes bishop to d4 check, and that was the point of the pawn push. You have to free up the d4 square for the bishop, and now the problem is if you, for example, go king f1, then rook to h3, and now the knight on d3 is terrible, and there's no good way to deal with this. You have to give up material, because if you try to hold on to everything, let's say you defend the knight, just rook h1 check, rook g1 checkmate. So great stuff there. So after bishop to d4 check, we have knight to f2 by Hare Krishna, and now rook to c2. Finally, Alireza brings his rook to the second rank, not going for the greedy bishop captures here. Activity is always above all. So here, king f1, white unpins here, and now rook captures on b2. Now you will gobble up those pawns. We have rook to e2, offering a rook trade. Now rook b1 check, rook to e1, and now rook h back to b6. Now saying, okay, you can trade here, but then my other rook comes to the b1 square with check, and now if you go up the board, then I can always check, you pick up the pawn, or if you play something like this, then it's just a very, very passive position for white, not fun to play. So after this rook h to b6, we have knight to d3, and now bishop to c3. Attacking the rook here, we have rook captures on b1, forcing the trade, rook captures, and king f2. And now Alireza starts bringing the king into the game. King e7, we have rook to h2, now with ideas of shifting the rook over to the 7th rank, king f6, and now king to e3. And here, king to g5 by Alireza. And king to g5 is very, very interesting because it kind of invites rook to h7, and there doesn't seem to be an idea behind it. What Alireza had in mind, I have no idea. Probably to go back with the king if he goes for this. But if you're wondering why not just capture the pawn, this is not a free pawn. If you capture it, then there's bishop captures on d5. Bishop captures, now rook h5 check with the idea of capturing the bishop, and if the king defends, knight f4 checks and picks up the bishop here, and white will be very happy with this position as it's the best one he can get from there. So instead, king to g5, not capturing this pawn, and now here Harikrishna did not even test what happens after rook to h7. He decided to go for knight to c5 instead, put some pressure on the b7 pawn. Now his idea is rook to h7 might come on the next move, and here rook to b5, trying to kick away the knight, but now rook to h7, trying to trade knight for bishop here, but just bishop to g8. Of course, you do not have this check, the bishop covers that square. So rook to c7, and now finally king captures on f5. Now it's all right to capture it. And here white is up, black is up 2 pawns, and white really needs to do something about that. Being 2 pawns down is not great, but it's hard to find a move for white. There doesn't seem to be an active idea. So white went with the idea that let's just grab a pawn, and if we survive, then we survive. So here Harikrishna played knight captures on b7, but now again Alireza just goes in for the kill and plays d4 with check. And now how do you survive this? Your options are very limited. You could go king d3. For example, king f2. Let's see what happens if king to d3. If king d3, then king f4 attacks the bishop, you move the bishop, and then comes rook to b2 with the idea of this check. So you have to prevent that, bishop to c2, but now bishop to e6 with the idea of bishop f5 check, and then you win the game. So knight to d6 blocking this, and now just bishop to b4, preparing to eliminate the defender of the f5 square, and that's it. There's no defending this. If you try something like rook to e7, it doesn't help because the bishop just moves, and now the knight is under attack. You have to defend it, and here you just captures, and king e5, and that's it. Now you have to give up the rook for the bishop, or you move the rook, and then again this check comes, and then you pick up the piece, and so on. So it's it's an impossible position to play for white. So king to d3 out of the question. King to f2 is what was played in the game. And here Alireza goes rook to b2 with check, bishop to e2, and now king f4. Just limiting the options of this white king. This is for the moment not the greatest of moves because the bishop will fall, so Alireza will simply prepare that. Knight to d6, and now bishop to d2. Now d3 becomes a real threat. So here king to f1, getting the king away from the second rank that the rook occupies, and now rook to b1 with check. And now the problem is if you go something like king f2, then bishop to e2. Bishop to e3 with check is just deadly. King g2, and you're getting checkmated. Bishop here delivers check, king goes here, and now rook to h1 will be checkmate. So instead, after rook to b1 check, here bishop to d1 was played, kinda getting into maybe if rook captures just king here, and then we pick up the bishop or the rook. The problem is bishop a5 again attacks white's rook, so this is not possible. But Alireza did not go for the immediate grab. Alireza just played d3, and it was in this position on move 56 that Pentala Harikrishna resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. There is nothing. Rook captures on d1 is coming, and that's just it. You're getting checkmated whatever you play, especially like if you go after the bishop, it's just an immediate checkmate. Rook captures with check, king f2, bishop to e3 check, king to g2. Now bishop d5 check, you have to go up the board, and then just rook to h1 will be checkmate. So incredible win by Alireza with the black pieces. And this means a lot for the current standings, as after 7 rounds of the Tata Steel Masters, these are the standings. So let's check it out. Alireza is on top with 5.5 points out of 8, having an incredible tournament with a rating performance of 28.62. So that's just incredible. Alone with 5.5 points. Then 4 people with 5 points. Anish Giri, Andrei Esipenko, Jordan Van Forest, and Fabiano Caruana. With 4.5, Niels Grandelius, Pentala and Magnus are on 4 out of 8. With 3.5, Radoslav Wojtaszek. With 3, we have Maxim Vasil Lagrav, Jan Krzysztof Duda, Aryan Tari, and David Anton Giharo. And in last place, Alexander Donchenko with 2.5 out of 8. So imagine if Alireza didn't lose to Magnus in the first round, he would be up a full point ahead of everyone. And also something I wanted to show you, if you guys are interested, let me just load that up. Just give me a second. Alireza's rating is currently very, very impressive. Oh, come on. me and my file namings. Oh, right, ESH. Why don't I see it? All right. Yeah, I think it's this one. No, it's not. Oh, come on. Oh, there we go. All right, nice. All right, so these are the live ratings, and as you can see, Firouzja is up by 11 points, so that's super impressive. And he's now currently number 14 in the world, and he's very close. He needs how many points to get in the top 10? He needs less than 5 points, so he needs less than 5 rating points to take over everyone, Richard Rapport, Van Gaal, Rajabov, and Maxim Vachier-Lagrave, and then go into the world top 10. And as you can see, Magnus is down by 17.7 points, but that's the downside of being so much higher rated than everyone else. If you lose a game, it's gonna really hurt your rating, as you can see here. So if Magnus loses one more game, he might even go below Fabi. Okay, not one, but it's it does hurt when he loses to, for example, Esipenko, like he did there, as Esipenko was over 200 rating points lower rated than Magnus. But yeah, really incredible stuff, and yeah, we'll see what happens. Can Firouzja continue this onslaught? He already faced Magnus in round 1, so we'll see if anyone else can challenge him. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Eric Hinterbila, Mike Marshall, Ion Tamaka, Ramdan Smith McLeod, and Jared Langdon for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Tata Steel, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.